Clara Whitmore had always believed that silence was safer than confrontation. That night in Manhattan, with rain sliding down the glass walls of their penthouse and the city glowing beneath them, she proved herself wrong. She wasn't looking for anything. That mattered. Clara had only opened Andrew's iPad to turn down the volume buzzing from the kitchen counter. A calendar alert flashed. Then an email preview followed. Short, careless, devastating. I miss you already. Last night shouldn't have ended so soon. Her fingers froze. The world didn't explode. It narrowed. From the bedroom, Andrew's voice drifted casually through the steam of the shower, humming like a man with nothing to hide. Clara stood barefoot on Italian marble floors, one hand resting instinctively on her stomach. 4 months pregnant. 6 years of waiting, countless appointments. A miracle she guarded with quiet fear. She read the message again, then another, then a third. The woman wasn't a stranger. That was the cruel part. The emails were polished, strategic, written by someone who understood deals, timing, leverage. Clara recognized the tone. Corporate, precise, dangerous. Outside, Fifth Avenue pulsed with life. Taxis, headlights, people going somewhere, believing in tomorrow. Inside, Clara's chest tightened as a sharp, unfamiliar pressure bloomed beneath her ribs. She didn't cry. Not yet. Andrew stepped out of the shower, towel slung low, confidence intact. "You're still awake?" he asked, smiling easily. The smile that once made her feel chosen now felt rehearsed. Clara lifted the iPad slowly. Who is Madeline Shaw? For half a second, just half, Andrew hesitated. That was all it took. The air shifted, his expression hardened, recalibrated. Why are you snooping? He asked, calm but clipped. Not denial, not apology. Clara felt dizzy. The room tilted. Her hand pressed tighter against her stomach as pain, sharp, unmistakable, cut through her lower abdomen. I don't feel well, she whispered. Andrew sighed, already checking his phone. You're stressed. We'll talk later. I have a board call. The elevator doors closed behind him minutes later, leaving Clara alone with the city, the truth, and a pain she didn't yet understand. She would later realize this was the moment everything ended, and the moment something far darker began. Clara did not sleep that night. The pain in her abdomen dulled into a constant ache, like a warning that refused to fade. Morning light crept over Manhattan, pale and indifferent, illuminating the life she had trusted without question only hours before. Andrew returned just after sunrise. He moved quietly, as if silence could erase the damage. His suit jacket was draped over one arm, his phone still glowing in his hand. He looked irritated, not guilty. You should have rested, he said, placing his phone face down on the counter. Stress isn't good for the baby. The word baby landed wrong. Heavy, sharp. Clara studied him, really studied him, as if she were seeing a stranger rehearsing the role of her husband. Who is she? She asked again. Her voice surprised her. Calm, steady, almost detached. Andrew exhaled slowly, the way he did in negotiations when someone cornered him with facts he couldn't deny. Her name is Madeline Shaw, he said. She works in finance. It's complicated. Everything sounds complicated when you don't want to call it what it is, Clara replied. Andrew's jaw tightened. You're overreacting. That was the moment Clara understood something important. He wasn't afraid of losing her. He was afraid of losing control. Later that afternoon, when Andrew left for another urgent meeting, Clara did something she had never done before. She searched his office, not out of jealousy, but instinct. The same instinct that had warned her something was wrong long before the email appeared. What she found made her hands tremble. Madeline Shaw wasn't just a name in his inbox. She appeared in documents, calendar invites, encrypted threads buried deep in his laptop. Financial projections, investment notes, Strategy decks marked confidential. Madeline wasn't hidden. She was embedded. This woman knew their business, their money, their risks. Clara sank into Andrew's leather chair, nausea rising. Madeline wasn't a mistake. She was a decision. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "I didn't plan for you to find out like this." Clara stared at the screen. Another message followed. "But you deserve to know the truth." Her chest tightened as she typed back with shaking fingers. "Who are you?" The reply came almost instantly. "Someone your husband should have told you about long ago." Clara's hand moved to her stomach as another wave of pain rolled through her, sharper this time, stealing her breath. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. Inside, Clara realized the affair was only the surface. Whatever Andrew was involved in, Madeline Shaw was not just the other woman. She was part of something far more dangerous. Clara waited until the apartment was completely silent before opening the safe. Andrew had always said it was for backup documents, nothing important enough to worry about. He liked saying things like that, minimizing, redirecting, making her feel foolish for asking questions that mattered. The safe opened with a soft mechanical click. Inside were folders she had never seen before. Thick, organized, labeled in Andrew's precise handwriting. Clara pulled the first one out and sat at the desk by the window, Manhattan stretching endlessly beyond the glass. The first document bore her name, Clara Whitmore. Her breath caught. She flipped through the pages slowly, the way a lawyer reads when instinct screams danger. Loan guarantees, advisory signatures, legal acknowledgments. Her signature appeared again and again, real, unmistakable. She recognized the pen strokes, the slight slant in the C, the firm line under the last name. But she didn't remember signing most of these. Her hands began to shake. The deeper she read, the clearer it became. These weren't harmless documents. They were shields. If something went wrong, if regulators came, if investors panicked, if numbers didn't add up, liability didn't point to Andrew, it pointed to her. Clara's chest tightened as understanding settled in, heavy and suffocating. She hadn't just been betrayed as a wife. She'd been positioned, prepared, quietly placed between her husband and the consequences of his choices. A sudden memory surfaced, Andrew asking her to just sign something real quick during her second trimester appointment. Her nausea, her exhaustion, his reassurance that it was routine, that she trusted him. The pain in her abdomen flared sharply, forcing her to grip the edge of the desk. She closed her eyes, breathing through it, fear threading into something colder. Clarity. Her phone buzzed again. "He told me you wouldn't understand," the message from Madeline read. "That you'd panic." Clara stared at the words, anger finally burning through the fog of shock. She typed back, "Understand what?" The response came slower this time. That he needed someone expendable. Clara's vision blurred, not with tears, but with rage. Expendable. The word echoed as she looked down at the papers bearing her name, her identity, her life reduced to a buffer against Andrew's ambition. Footsteps sounded in the hallway outside the apartment. Andrew's key slid into the lock. Clara hastily returned the documents to the safe, her heart pounding. She straightened, smoothing her shirt, one hand instinctively protecting her stomach. When Andrew walked in, he smiled, unaware that the foundation beneath him had cracked. Clara met his eyes and said nothing. But inside, she understood the truth with devastating certainty. The affair was never the real danger. She was. One moment, Manhattan traffic crawled under a bruised gray sky. The next, water slammed against the windshield, blurring streetlights into long, trembling streaks. Clara gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white, her mind louder than the storm around her. She shouldn't have been driving. She knew that. The doctor had warned her about stress. Andrew had warned her too. though his concern sounded more like inconvenience than care. But staying in that apartment, surrounded by lies, signatures, and silence, had felt unbearable. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat. A message from Andrew. "We'll talk when you calm down. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Clara let out a shaky laugh that dissolved into a sob she barely recognized as her own. Harder than it needs to be. As if betrayal, manipulation, and fear were inconveniences to be managed. The Brooklyn Bridge loomed ahead, cables disappearing into mist. Traffic slowed. Red brake lights reflected off wet pavement, pulsing like warning signals. Clara's hand drifted to her stomach as another wave of pain surged, stronger this time, sharper. Wrong. "Please," she whispered, unsure who she was speaking to. "Just hold on." The car lurched as someone braked suddenly ahead. Clara reacted too late. Tires screamed. The impact wasn't violent, just abrupt, a jolt that snapped her forward, the seatbelt cutting into her chest. Then came the pain. It stole her breath completely. Clara gasped, her vision tunneling as sirens echoed faintly in the distance. She tasted metal. Rain soaked through her hair as she stumbled out of the car, hands shaking, legs weak. "I'm pregnant," she told the paramedic when they arrived. Her voice sounded far away. "Something's wrong." The hospital lights were too bright, too clean. Time fractured into fragments, questions, forms, the beeping of machines. Clara stared at the ceiling as a doctor spoke softly, carefully, choosing words that could not soften what they carried. "There's no heartbeat." The sentence landed without sound. Clara turned her head slowly, as if the movement itself required permission. "No," she said. It wasn't denial. It was instinct, a refusal rooted deeper than language. The doctor waited. Nurses stepped back. Silence filled the room. Clara's phone lay on the table beside her. Missed calls from Andrew, messages piling up. None from the hospital. None asking where she was. She closed her eyes as tears finally came. Not loud, not dramatic. Just steady, unstoppable. Somewhere across the river, the city kept moving. Deals were made, calls were answered, lives continued. But on a quiet hospital bed, Clara Whitmore lost the child she had waited years to hold. And she understood, with devastating clarity, that Andrew had already chosen to leave her long before this night. She was simply the last to know. Clara woke to the sound of machines before she understood where she was. The steady beep beside her bed felt louder than it should have, each pulse echoing through the hollow space in her chest. Pale morning light filtered through the hospital blinds, washing the room in a colorless calm that felt cruelly out of place. For a moment, she expected to see Andrew sitting nearby. That familiar posture, phone in hand, leg bouncing, half listening. The chair was empty. Her throat tightened. She reached for her phone, hands heavy, movements slow. No new messages. No missed calls since the night before. The last text from him still sat unread in her mind, cold and dismissive. A nurse entered quietly, offering a gentle smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Do you want me to call anyone for you?" she asked. Clara shook her head before thinking. The answer came too easily. Hours passed. Doctors spoke softly, explaining procedures, recovery times, what came next. Clara nodded when expected, signed forms without reading them, stared at the wall when words felt impossible. Each time footsteps approached the door, a small, irrational hope flared inside her. Each time, it faded. By early afternoon, reality settled in like a weight she couldn't lift. Andrew wasn't coming. Not after the accident. Not after the loss. Not now. Her phone finally buzzed. "I'm tied up today. Board situation escalated. We'll talk tonight." That was it. No question. No apology. No acknowledgement of the empty space where their child had been. Clara's fingers curled around the phone until her knuckles ached. She didn't cry. Something inside her had gone eerily still, like a part of her had shut down to survive. She thought of the years she had rearranged her life around his schedule. The dinners eaten alone, the holidays cut short, the moments she had convinced herself were temporary sacrifices for a shared future. A future he hadn't protected. As evening approached, a social worker stopped by, explaining support options, counseling resources, things people said when loss became procedural. Clara listened politely, thanking her when she left, then turned her face toward the window. Outside, the city glowed as if nothing had changed. Cars moved, lights flickered on. Somewhere, Andrew was sitting in a glass-walled boardroom, arguing numbers, while his wife lay alone in a hospital bed, grieving a child he would never meet. The realization settled deep, heavier than grief itself. Andrew hadn't chosen work over her just this once. He had chosen it every time it mattered. When the nurse returned to discharge her, Clara stood slowly, steadying herself against the bed. She glanced once more at the empty chair beside her, then picked up her coat. She walked out of the hospital alone, and with each step down the corridor, something fragile but necessary hardened inside her. If Andrew could abandon her at her lowest moment, then whatever came next would not be built on waiting for him to change. It would be built on her learning how to leave. The papers arrived 2 days later, not by courier, not with an apology or a warning. They were delivered by a junior associate from Andrew's firm, a polite young man who wouldn't meet Clara's eyes as he placed the envelope on the small kitchen table of her temporary apartment. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, as if the word could soften what waited inside. Clara didn't open the envelope right away. She made tea first, her movements careful, deliberate. Her body still felt fragile, like glass that had already cracked once and might shatter if handled roughly. When she finally sat down, the city outside her window looked distant, unreal. The first page confirmed what she already knew: divorce. The next pages revealed what Andrew was really after. He wanted speed, silence, control. The settlement was brutally one-sided. Clara would receive a modest payout, barely enough to restart her life. She would waive any claim to Andrew's company, its assets, or future earnings. Most chilling of all was the final clause, printed neatly, almost politely. A non-disclosure agreement. She was forbidden from speaking about Andrew's finances, his business practices, or any documents she had signed during their marriage. Violation meant financial ruin, legal annihilation. Clara felt a familiar tightness in her chest, but she forced herself to keep reading. This wasn't just a divorce. It was a muzzle. Andrew arrived that evening unannounced. He stood in the doorway, immaculate as always, as if the world hadn't tilted off its axis days earlier. "This is for the best," he said calmly. "Dragging things out won't help either of us." "What about our child?" Clara asked. Her voice barely trembled. Andrew looked away, just for a moment. "What's done is done." That was his answer. He explained the agreement the way he explained everything, rational, detached, framed as generosity. He spoke of reputations, investors, damage control. He never once said sorry. Clara thought of her mother, weak and waiting for her at home, of the medical bills, of her suspended license to practice law, tied up in technical reviews Andrew's influence had quietly triggered. She understood the trap perfectly. If she fought, she would lose everything. If she stayed silent, she might survive. Clara signed. The pen felt heavier than it should have, each stroke sealing something final. Andrew watched closely, relief flickering across his face when she finished. "You're doing the right thing," he said. Clara looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "For now," she replied. Andrew didn't notice. He kissed her forehead once, a gesture so hollow it almost made her laugh, and left with the signed papers tucked under his arm. When the door closed, Clara sat alone at the table, the silence thick and absolute. She had given Andrew exactly what he wanted, and in doing so, she had bought herself time. Time he would come to regret. The fall was quiet. There were no headlines, no dramatic confrontations, no public collapse that people could point to and say, "That's when it happened." Clara's life unraveled in small, efficient ways, exactly the way Andrew had planned it. The first letter came from the State Bar Association. Her license to practice law was under review due to potential conflicts of interest tied to documents she had signed during her marriage. Nothing accusatory, just enough uncertainty to make firms hesitate, enough to make phone calls go unanswered. Then the accounts froze. Not all of them, just the ones Andrew had once insisted they simplify by putting under joint management. Clara stood in line at her bank, the hum of fluorescent lights buzzing above her, while a polite teller explained that access was temporarily restricted pending clarification from legal counsel. Legal counsel that now belonged to Andrew. She moved out of the penthouse within a week. The apartment felt hollow without its glass walls and skyline views, but the smaller space suited her new reality. A borrowed couch, 2 suitcases, boxes stacked neatly against a wall she tried not to lean on too often. Her mother's health declined quickly after that. Clara spent her days at hospital bedsides and her nights scrolling through job postings she was overqualified for and still couldn't get. She brewed cheap coffee instead of stopping at cafes. She read legal blogs on an aging laptop, forcing her mind to stay sharp while everything else slipped away. When her mother passed, it happened in the early morning, quietly, with Clara holding her hand and whispering reassurances she wasn't sure she believed. The grief was different this time, quieter, deeper, like something breaking far below the surface. Andrew sent flowers, white lilies, a card with his assistant's handwriting. "My condolences." That was all. The final blow came weeks later when a reporter called. Questions about Andrew's company, about Clara's involvement, about whether she had known. She declined to comment, her voice steady, the non-disclosure agreement echoing in her mind like a threat. By the end of the month, Clara was alone in every sense that mattered. No career, no marriage, no child, no mother. Even her reputation felt borrowed, fragile, dependent on Andrew's silence as much as her own. Some nights, she sat on the floor of her apartment, back against the wall, and let the weight of it press down on her until breathing felt optional. This was the point where most stories ended, where a woman disappeared quietly, folded into the background of someone else's success. But something inside Clara refused to break completely. She had lost everything Andrew thought mattered, which meant, for the first time, she had nothing left to protect. And that realization, slow, cold, unmistakable, was the beginning of something dangerous, something Andrew had never accounted for. While Clara learned how to live with less, Andrew Whitmore learned how to look untouchable. The headlines came first. FinTech visionary leads logistics giant into a new era. His face appeared on business sites, confident and composed, standing in front of glass towers and digital stock tickers. Analysts praised his decisive leadership. Investors called him disciplined, efficient, a man who had survived a turbulent year and emerged stronger. From the outside, Andrew's life looked immaculate. The company expanded aggressively. New offices, new capital, private meetings that stretched late into the night and ended with handshakes Clara once believed meant integrity. He wore success like armor, tailored suits, calm interviews, carefully rehearsed humility. No one mentioned the wife who had quietly disappeared. No one mentioned the pregnancy that never reached the press. And certainly no one mentioned the documents with her name on them, buried deep enough to stay invisible. Clara saw his rise in fragments. A notification on a news app while waiting for the bus, a photo glimpsed on a muted television in a diner. Andrew on a stage, smiling as applause filled the room, speaking about resilience and sacrifice. She turned the volume down every time. It would have been easier to believe he had won if the victory had looked loud, cruel, obvious. Instead, it felt surgical, clean, as if the world had agreed to move on without asking what it had cost. Andrew noticed the silence, too, and mistook it for defeat. In private, he told people Clara had been unstable, that grief had made her irrational, that the divorce had been mutual, necessary, unfortunate. He framed himself as patient, understanding, the man who had tried, and people believed him. Why wouldn't they? Clara wasn't there to contradict the story. She wasn't suing. She wasn't talking. She wasn't fighting back. From Andrew's perspective, the problem had been solved. He even felt generous at times. Once, he instructed his assistant to check if Clara needed anything reasonable. The message never reached her. It didn't need to. Andrew slept well again. He assumed the worst was behind him, that whatever he had done had already taken its toll. That Clara, stripped of leverage and voice, would eventually fade into memory, a footnote to a chapter he no longer read. What he didn't see was the cost of his own confidence. Because while Andrew was busy performing success, he failed to notice the subtle shift beneath the surface. The quiet movements of people who didn't need headlines. The kind of men who waited, calculated, and stepped in only when everything was perfectly positioned to fall. Andrew believed the story was over. He was wrong. This was only the part where he felt safe. Clara didn't expect the interview to last more than 15 minutes. The office was tucked inside an older building near Park Avenue, understated in a city that loved excess. No logo in the lobby, no glass walls screaming importance. Just a receptionist who nodded politely and handed her a visitor badge with practiced calm. "Mr. Cole will see you now." Nathan Cole's office was quiet in a way Clara hadn't experienced in years. No ringing phones, no assistants hovering, just a large desk, a wall of neatly arranged files, and a window overlooking the city from a distance rather than above it. Nathan stood when she entered. He was taller than she expected, gray threaded through dark hair, his movements measured. His eyes were observant but not intrusive, as if he'd learned the value of watching before speaking. "Ms. Whitmore," he said, offering a handshake. "Thank you for coming." They sat. Nathan didn't begin with small talk. He reviewed her resume slowly, occasionally glancing up, as if matching the words on the page to the woman in front of him. Clara waited, hands folded, aware of how much rested on moments like this now. "You stepped away from corporate law at the peak of your career," he said finally. "Most people don't do that without a reason." "My family needed me," Clara replied. Nathan nodded once, as if that answer confirmed something rather than raised questions. "And then you disappeared." Clara met his gaze. "I didn't disappear. I was removed." A faint smile touched his mouth, not amusement, but recognition. "That's what I thought." He slid a folder across the desk. Clara's name was printed on the tab. Her stomach tightened. Slowly she opened it. Inside were copies of documents she recognized instantly. Loan guarantees, advisory signatures, the same papers she had found in Andrew's safe months earlier. Clara looked up sharply. "How did you get these?" Nathan leaned back in his chair. "Because I specialize in companies that are very good at hiding their weaknesses," he said. "And your ex-husband's company has several." The room felt suddenly smaller. "You were never the liability, Clara," Nathan continued calmly. "You were the firewall. He placed risk on you because he believed you wouldn't fight back." Clara's pulse thundered in her ears. "I signed an NDA." "I know," Nathan said. "That's why I asked you here, not to talk, to listen." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "There's a financial structure underneath Andrew's success that won't survive scrutiny. And when it collapses, everyone will look for someone to blame. Clara understood immediately. Herself. Nathan met her eyes, steady and serious. You can stay silent and be crushed by it. Or you can help me dismantle it, legally. The weight of the choice settled over her, heavy and electric. For the first time since everything fell apart, Clara felt something unfamiliar stir beneath the fear. Leverage. And across the desk, Nathan Cole waited, patient, knowing this was the moment her story stopped being about survival and started becoming something else entirely. Clara thought she understood betrayal. She believed she had already seen its worst form, quiet, intimate, delivered by the man she trusted most. She was wrong. Nathan didn't push her for an answer that day. He simply said, "Think carefully. People rarely survive this kind of collapse without being sacrificed." Then he let her leave with copies of the documents and a weight that followed her down the elevator and into the street. 3 nights later, the second betrayal revealed itself. It came not from Andrew, but from Madeline. The message arrived just after midnight, lighting up Clara's phone in the dark of her apartment. "We need to talk, in person." Clara stared at the screen for a long moment. Every instinct warned her not to respond. But another part of her, the part that had been ignored for too long, knew this was important. They met at a quiet hotel bar near Midtown, the kind of place where conversations dissolved into low music and no one remembered faces. Madeline arrived first, impeccably dressed, calm, composed. She looked nothing like a woman about to confess something dangerous. "You look thinner," Madeline said softly. Clara didn't sit. "Why are you here?" Madeline's smile faded. She gestured to the chair. "Because Andrew is finished. He just doesn't know it yet." That sentence changed everything, Madeline explained quickly, efficiently. She hadn't fallen in love with Andrew. She had studied him, his company, his appetite for risk. She had helped him move money, structure deals, blur lines that regulators hadn't noticed. Yet. "And now?" Clara asked. "Now I'm exiting," Madeline replied, "before the collapse." Clara felt cold spread through her chest. "You're going to let him take the fall?" Madeline hesitated. "He always planned to let you take it." The truth landed hard. Madeline leaned forward. "Nathan Cole is circling. I know his people. He dismantles companies like this for a living. When it happens, Andrew will look for someone to blame, and he'll choose you again." Clara finally sat down. Madeline slid a flash drive across the table. "These are backups, communications, proof of intent. I'm giving you one chance to protect yourself." "Why?" Clara asked. Madeline's eyes flickered with something close to guilt. "Because I don't want to be the only villain in this story." Clara picked up the drive slowly, understanding dawning with terrifying clarity. This wasn't just Andrew's downfall anymore. It was a war, and everyone was choosing sides. Clara didn't sleep that night. She spread the documents across her kitchen table, the flash drive resting at the center like a loaded weapon. Every page carried weight. Names, dates, signatures, decisions that had once felt abstract and now looked lethal. She read until dawn, not as a betrayed wife, but as the lawyer she used to be. Patterns emerged, routes money had taken, emails timed around board approvals, language crafted to appear compliant while doing the opposite. Andrew hadn't been reckless. He had been deliberate. And that meant there were rules, even inside the chaos. At sunrise, Clara called Nathan. "I'm in," she said. No hesitation, no conditions. Nathan didn't sound surprised. "Good," he replied. "Then we do this clean." They met that afternoon in the same quiet office. Nathan listened as Clara laid out what she'd found, her voice steady, precise. She didn't embellish. She didn't speculate. She connected dots and let the truth speak for itself. "This is enough to trigger an internal review," Nathan said, tapping a page lightly. "And enough to protect you if he tries to shift blame." Clara nodded. "He will." "Of course," Nathan said. "Men like Andrew always do." They set boundaries. Clara would not violate her non-disclosure agreement. She wouldn't leak. She wouldn't threaten. She would advise, privately, legally, surgically. Nathan's team would handle the pressure points, the timing, the exposure. For the first time in months, Clara felt something close to control. Not power. Control. Days later, Andrew called. "I hear you've been asking questions," he said, his tone casual, almost amused. "Be careful, Clara. You don't want to reopen wounds." Clara smiled, though he couldn't see it. "I'm not reopening anything," she replied. "I'm closing files." Silence followed, then a short laugh. "You don't have the leverage you think you do." Clara ended the call without responding. That night, she deleted old photos, not out of anger, but clarity. The woman who had waited, trusted, absorbed damage, she was gone. In her place stood someone quieter, sharper, someone who understood that survival didn't require permission. Andrew believed the game belonged to him. He didn't know the rules had changed, and he certainly didn't know that Clara Whitmore was no longer a liability to be managed. She was an active variable, and she had finally decided how she would be used. The boardroom on Park Avenue was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Manhattan skyline like a promise of permanence, while the long glass table reflected the faces of people who believed they controlled outcomes simply by sitting there. Andrew Whitmore stood at the head of the table, confident, composed, perfectly rehearsed. "This quarter proves our strategy is working," he said, tapping a slide on the screen. "Revenue growth, expansion forecasts." Applause followed, polite but approving. Andrew smiled modestly, the way men do when they expect admiration. He didn't see Nathan Cole enter the room. Nathan didn't announce himself. He didn't need to. The quiet shift in attention did that for him. Conversations stalled. A few board members straightened in their chairs, recognition flickering across their faces. Andrew turned slowly, irritation flashing before he masked it. "This is a closed meeting," he said coolly. Nathan placed a slim folder on the table. "Then you should have checked your calendar more carefully." He nodded toward the general counsel. "You invited us." Confusion rippled through the room. Andrew looked to the counsel, who avoided his gaze. Nathan took a seat without asking permission. "I represent a consortium currently reviewing exposure within your financial structure," he said evenly. "What we found raises serious concerns." Andrew laughed softly. "This feels premature." "Then this will feel educational," Nathan replied. He slid documents across the table. Not many, just enough. The room changed. Questions came fast. About shell entities, about deferred liability, about signatures that redirected accountability. Andrew answered smoothly at first, but the rhythm broke. He hesitated, corrected himself. Sweat gathered at his temple. Then Nathan said, "We've also identified an internal firewall designed to absorb regulatory fallout." He paused, letting the words settle. "The firewall is your ex-wife." Every head turned. Andrew's face drained of color. "That's absurd," he snapped. "She has no operational authority." Nathan didn't argue. He simply nodded to the screen. Clara's name appeared, her signatures, her guarantees. The stock ticker at the corner of the screen flickered red. Phones buzzed, one by one. A board member stood. "We need an emergency review." Another followed. "Effective immediately." Andrew opened his mouth to speak, but no one looked at him anymore. Nathan closed the folder calmly. "This isn't an accusation," he said. "It's a correction." As the meeting dissolved into controlled chaos, Andrew remained frozen, staring at the screen. For the first time, The skyline outside no longer looked permanent. It looked like something that could fall. Madeline Shaw didn't panic when the news broke. That was the mistake everyone noticed later. When the market reacted and Andrew's name began circulating in urgent emails and whispered calls, Madeline remained composed. Too composed. She left the office early, walked past the security desk with a polite nod, and drove away without looking back. By nightfall, she was already on a flight manifest flagged by compliance teams she once advised. Clara learned this from Nathan the following morning. "She's running," he said calmly over the phone, "which means she knows exactly how bad this is." Madeline didn't get far. Federal investigators moved faster than Andrew ever had. By the time Madeline landed, her accounts were frozen. Her devices were flagged. She was escorted into a quiet room with no windows and asked questions that didn't require raised voices to sound terrifying. Her confidence cracked quickly. Madeline had always believed she was smarter than the men she worked with. Smarter than Andrew. Smarter than the system. But systems didn't care about intention, only evidence. And there was a lot of it. She asked for Clara by name. The request stunned even the agents. Clara agreed to meet her only after careful consideration. Not out of sympathy, but closure. They sat across from each other in a small interview room, the hum of fluorescent lights filling the silence. Madeline looked smaller now, stripped of polish. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded them together. "I never meant for it to go this far," Madeline said quietly. Clara studied her without emotion. "You meant for it to go far enough." Madeline swallowed. "Andrew promised he'd protect me." Clara almost smiled. "He promised me the same thing." The irony settled between them, heavy and undeniable. "They're offering me a deal," Madeline continued. "Reduced charges, but only if I cooperate fully." "And?" Clara asked. "And I need you to testify," Madeline said. "To confirm what he did. To shift the narrative." Clara leaned back slowly. "You want me to save you." Madeline's eyes filled with tears. "I don't want to go to prison." Clara nodded once, understanding something essential. This was the moment Madeline realized power had limits. "I won't testify for you," Clara said evenly. "But I won't stop the truth from being told." Madeline stared at her, devastated. By the end of the week, Madeline Shaw was formally charged. Her career vanished overnight. The woman who had believed herself untouchable became the first to fall. And, watching from the outside, Andrew Whitmore finally understood something he had never considered. He wasn't losing control slowly. He was losing it all at once. Andrew Whitmore had always believed panic was for other people. In crisis meetings, he was the calm one. When markets dipped, he reassured. When partners hesitated, he pressured quietly. Control, to Andrew, wasn't just a skill. It was an identity. Losing it felt impossible. Until it wasn't. The calls started before dawn. Lawyers, advisors, board members who had stopped using his first name. Each conversation carried the same undertone: distance, protection, survival. By noon, Andrew's access to internal systems was limited. By evening, it was gone entirely. He stood alone in his glass office, Manhattan stretching below him, and for the first time the view felt hostile. Nathan Cole's move had been precise. Not loud enough to trigger sympathy, not soft enough to ignore. The company hadn't collapsed yet, but it was bleeding, and everyone knew who would be blamed. Andrew needed an exit, or a shield. His mind went where it always had. Clara. He called his legal team and instructed them to prepare a statement, carefully worded, plausibly deniable. It framed Clara as an over-involved spouse who had insisted on participating in advisory decisions. Someone emotional. Someone unstable after personal loss. Someone who had signed documents without fully understanding them. Someone expendable. That narrative won't hold, one lawyer warned. There's evidence, Andrew snapped. Then make it hold. By the next morning, rumors leaked. Not directly from him, never directly. Questions circulated online. Had Clara known? Had she approved the structures? Why had her name appeared so frequently? Clara saw it coming. Nathan warned her immediately. He's trying to reposition the blast radius. I expected that, she replied calmly. Andrew requested a meeting that afternoon. Neutral location, private. He arrived looking thinner, sharper around the edges, confidence now tinged with desperation. You're destroying everything, he said without preamble. You don't even understand what you're doing. Clara met his gaze steadily. I understand exactly what I'm doing. You signed those documents, Andrew continued, leaning forward. If this goes public, you go down with me. Clara didn't flinch. That's where you're wrong. Andrew laughed, brittle and forced. You think Nathan Cole is saving you? Men like him don't save anyone. Clara stood. No, they don't. They choose who's worth standing beside. Andrew watched her walk away, something unfamiliar tightening in his chest. Fear. Because for the first time, his old tactic wasn't working. Clara wasn't shrinking. She was waiting. And Andrew Whitmore had run out of places to hide. Clara had never planned to use the recording. It had been captured years earlier, almost by accident, an old habit from her legal days when she documented conversations that felt wrong even before she understood why. Andrew had been pacing the living room that night, phone pressed to his ear, voice low but sharp. She had been in the hallway, unseen, her phone in her hand, instinct overriding doubt. She remembered thinking she might delete it later. She never did. Now, as Andrew's attempts to shift blame accelerated, Clara sat in Nathan's office with the device resting between them. The room was silent, except for the distant hum of traffic below. This is admissible, Nathan said after listening carefully. And devastating. Clara nodded. I know. The recording wasn't dramatic. That was its power. Andrew's voice was calm, methodical, explaining how placing liability under Clara's name would keep regulators focused elsewhere. How she was safe because she trusted him. How worst-case scenarios always required someone expendable. Hearing it again made Clara's stomach tighten, not from pain, but resolve. They released nothing immediately. Instead, Nathan's team filed a quiet motion requesting protective status for Clara as a cooperating witness. It landed on the right desk at the right time. Within hours, Andrew's counsel received notice. His reaction was immediate. He called Clara repeatedly. When she didn't answer, he showed up at her apartment unannounced, his composure gone, eyes sharp with something close to panic. You recorded me? He demanded, voice low and furious. That's illegal. You should listen more carefully, Clara replied evenly. I was silent. You weren't. Andrew's face twisted. You think this makes you powerful? No, Clara said. It makes the truth unavoidable. For the first time, Andrew looked at her without superiority, without dismissal. He saw her clearly, and he didn't like what he saw. This will destroy me, he said. Clara met his gaze, steady and unflinching. You did that yourself. He reached for her arm. She stepped back. I lost our child, she continued quietly. You lost your company. These things are not equal, but they are connected. Andrew's shoulders slumped as the weight of inevitability settled in. He had spent years controlling narratives, managing risk, deciding who paid the price. Now, the price had his name on it. When he left, Clara locked the door and leaned against it, breathing slowly. Not from fear, from release. She hadn't spoken out of revenge. She had spoken because silence had nearly buried her. and she would never let it do that again. Andrew Whitmore was arrested on a Tuesday morning. There were no cameras waiting outside his building, no dramatic chase. Just two federal agents in dark suits standing calmly in the lobby of the tower he had once helped design, their badges revealed only when the elevator doors closed behind them. Andrew recognized the moment instantly. He didn't resist. Resistance was for men who still believed in miracles. The agents escorted him upstairs to his office one last time. The space looked exactly as he had left it. Immaculate desk, skyline view, the illusion of permanence intact. Andrew reached for his jacket out of habit, then stopped when one agent shook his head. "You won't be needing that." Handcuffs clicked softly around his wrists. The sound was almost polite. News traveled fast anyway. By the time Andrew was led through the side exit of the building, whispers had already begun. Phones buzzed, emails circulated. A narrative Andrew could no longer control took shape without him. Clara learned about the arrest from Nathan. "They've taken him in," he said quietly. "Charges are formal. This isn't a negotiation." She closed her eyes and let the words settle. There was no rush of triumph, no satisfaction she could name, just a deep, steady exhale she hadn't realized she'd been holding for years. Later that day, Clara passed the same building on foot. She slowed without meaning to, looking up at the glass facade reflecting the afternoon sun. People inside moved as usual, meetings, calls, deals. The machine kept running. Andrew had believed himself irreplaceable. He wasn't. That evening she received a message from an unknown number. "He keeps asking for you." Clara didn't respond. She thought of the man who had once dismissed her pain as inconvenience, who had left her alone in a hospital room and tried to bury her beneath his ambition. She thought of the silence she had endured, the strength it had taken to survive it. Andrew's downfall wasn't loud. It was efficient, exactly like the systems he had built. As night fell over Manhattan, Clara stood by her window, the city lights flickering on one by one. Somewhere, Andrew sat in a holding room, stripped of power, stripped of narrative, finally facing consequences he could no longer redirect. Clara felt no need to witness it. Justice didn't require her presence. For the first time since everything began, she slept without fear. Not because the past was undone, but because it no longer owned her. The call came a week after Andrew's arrest. Clara was standing in the small kitchen of her apartment, watching water boil, when her phone rang. An unfamiliar number. She considered letting it go to voicemail, but something told her not to. "Ms. Whitmore," the voice said calmly. "This is the State Bar Review Committee." Her hand tightened around the phone. "We've concluded our investigation," the voice continued. "Based on the evidence provided and your cooperation, all allegations against you have been dismissed. Your license is fully reinstated, effective immediately." For a moment, Clara couldn't speak. "Ms. Whitmore?" the voice prompted. "Thank you," she finally said, her voice steady despite the sudden burn behind her eyes. "Thank you for calling." When the line went dead, Clara set the phone down slowly and leaned against the counter. The kettle screamed, forgotten. Steam fogged the window as something loosened inside her chest. She wasn't guilty. She never had been. The following days unfolded quietly, but everything had changed. Firms that once avoided her calls reached out again. Former colleagues sent cautious messages, then warmer ones. The narrative that had nearly crushed her began to reverse itself, not through spectacle, but through facts. Nathan invited her to his office later that week. "You don't owe me anything," he said as she sat across from him. "But I'd like you to stay." He slid a folder toward her. Inside was an offer, not employment, partnership. "You see patterns most people miss," Nathan continued, "and you understand the human cost behind the numbers. That matters here." Clara closed the folder gently. She didn't answer right away. That evening, she walked through Central Park alone, leaves crunching beneath her feet. She thought of who she had been a year ago, careful, accommodating, defined by what she endured rather than what she chose. She wasn't that woman anymore. The next morning, she accepted. Clara Whitmore returned to the world not as someone rescued, but as someone restored. Her name cleared, her voice intact, her future no longer dependent on anyone else's mercy. Andrew had taken years from her. He had taken her trust. He had taken a child she would always mourn. But he hadn't taken her ability to rebuild. As Clara stood in Nathan's office days later, sunlight spilling across the desk where she now worked as an equal, she understood something deeply and finally. Survival wasn't about escaping ruin. It was about standing tall after it and choosing what came next. Clara hadn't planned to keep the appointment. It was routine, the kind of follow-up doctors recommended after trauma, paperwork she had agreed to without thinking. On the morning of the visit, she stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her coat, telling herself it was only closure, nothing more. The clinic was quiet. Too quiet. The walls were painted a neutral color meant to soothe, but Clara's pulse still quickened as she sat on the edge of the exam table, hands folded in her lap. She had learned not to expect kindness from uncertainty. The doctor reviewed her chart carefully, scrolling through records, asking questions Clara answered without emotion. When the examination ended, the doctor paused, studying the screen a little longer than expected. "There's something I want to clarify," she said gently. Clara's stomach tightened. She nodded once. "After your miscarriage, you were told the trauma might have caused permanent complications," the doctor continued. "But medicine changes, and so do bodies." Clara looked up confused. "What does that mean?" "It means the earlier conclusion wasn't definitive," the doctor said. "Your recent tests suggest your fertility wasn't lost, not permanently." The words didn't land right away. Clara blinked. "You're saying I still can?" "Yes," the doctor replied. "There are no guarantees, but there is absolutely a future possibility." For a long moment, Clara said nothing. The room seemed to stretch, the air thick with something fragile and unexpected. Hope. It felt dangerous, like touching something too delicate to trust. Clara had buried that part of herself carefully, believing it was gone forever, because believing otherwise had hurt too much. "I spent months thinking my body had failed," Clara said quietly. The doctor shook her head. "Your body survived something brutal. That's not failure." On the walk home, Clara moved slowly, absorbing the weight of what she'd been given. Not a promise, not a miracle, just a door she had thought was permanently closed, now slightly open. She stopped at a small park and sat on a bench, watching children chase each other across the grass. Once, that sight would have broken her. Today, it didn't. She placed a hand over her stomach, not in grief, but acknowledgement. She had lost a child. That truth would never change. But she had not lost her future. And for the first time since everything fell apart, Clara allowed herself to imagine a life not defined by what was taken from her, but by what might still be possible. The thought didn't overwhelm her. It steadied her. Clara never noticed when the shift happened. There was no single moment where friendship crossed into something else, no dramatic confession, no carefully planned seduction. What grew between her and Nathan did so quietly, the way trust always does, through consistency, respect, and time. They worked late often, seated across from each other in the office long after the city outside dimmed. Conversations drifted from case strategy to books, from past mistakes to future plans neither of them had once believed they were allowed to make. Nathan never asked her to explain her pain. He never tried to fix it. He simply made space for it to exist. That, Clara realized, was love in its most honest form. The evening Nathan proposed didn't look like a milestone from the outside. No gala, no champagne tower. Just dinner at a small restaurant overlooking the river, the city lights reflected softly on the water. Clara wore a simple dress, Nathan wore the same calm expression he always did. They talked about work, about his daughter, about the case that was finally closing. Then Nathan reached into his jacket pocket, not with urgency, not with drama, but with certainty. "I'm not asking you because I need you," he said quietly. "And I'm not asking you because you saved me or I saved you." Clara looked at him, heart steady, open. "I'm asking because life has already taken enough from both of us," Nathan continued. "And what we've built, carefully, honestly, deserves to be chosen." He placed a ring on the table. Simple, unassuming, intentional. "I don't want to protect you," he said. "I want to stand beside you, if you'll let me." Clara felt tears gather, not from grief, but recognition. This wasn't rescue. This wasn't escape. It was partnership. "Yes," she said, without hesitation. Nathan exhaled, relief softening his features, and reached for her hand. The future didn't feel overwhelming anymore. It felt possible. As they left the restaurant, the city moved around them as it always had, busy, indifferent, alive. But Clara walked differently now, lighter, not because she had forgotten the past, but because it no longer defined her. She had survived loss. She had reclaimed herself. And now, she was choosing something new, not as a reward, but as a right. The wedding took place on a quiet autumn afternoon, just as the city softened into gold. There were no headlines, no photographers waiting beyond the gates. Clara wanted it that way. The ceremony was small, held at a riverside restaurant in Brooklyn, where the water reflected the skyline without trying to compete with it. Leaves drifted past the windows, as if time itself had slowed to watch. Nathan stood beside her, steady and calm, his daughter holding a small bouquet with both hands. Clara wore a simple dress, unadorned, elegant in its restraint. When she walked forward, she felt no fear, no doubt, only presence. She had survived worse than this moment could ever demand. The vows were quiet, honest. Nathan promised partnership, not protection. Clara promised truth, not perfection. When they exchanged rings, there was no applause at first, just a breath held collectively, then released. Later, as guests laughed softly over dinner, Clara stepped outside alone for a moment. The river moved steadily beneath the bridge, indifferent to human drama, constant in its flow. She placed a hand over her stomach, a gesture that now carried hope instead of grief. She thought of Andrew, sitting in a concrete room miles away, his world reduced to hearings and consequences. He had lost his freedom, his reputation, his illusion of control. Not because she had destroyed him, but because he had built everything on sacrifice that was never his to demand. Justice had come quietly, exactly as it should. Nathan joined her, slipping his hand into hers without a word. They stood together, watching the city lights emerge one by one, not as spectators to ambition, but as people who had chosen something better. "You okay?" he asked. Clara nodded. "I am." And she meant it. Her life was not perfect. It never would be. She carried loss she would always honor, scars she would never erase. But she also carried wisdom, strength, and the certainty that she had walked through fire without becoming cruel. That was her victory. Inside, laughter swelled. Music began. A future waited. Not promised, not guaranteed, but real. Clara turned back toward the light, toward the life she had rebuilt piece by piece. She had been broken. She had been underestimated. And in the end, she had been rewarded, not with revenge, but with peace, love, and a future that belonged entirely to her. So, the story has come to an end. And if you're still here with us right now, truly still here, then something in this journey must have touched your heart in a quiet but real way.
Stories like this aren't just about betrayal, loss, or even justice. They're about what happens after life breaks you, when no one is watching, when applause is gone, and when you have to decide who you will become.
Clara's journey reminds us of a simple Stoic truth Marcus Aurelius once wrote. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. She couldn't control the betrayal, the loss, or the injustice, but she could control her response. She chose dignity over chaos, clarity over revenge, and patience over despair. And in doing so, she healed. Another Stoic idea tells us that what stands in the way becomes the way. Pain didn't destroy her, it refined her. And maybe that's the quiet lesson meant for you, too. Whatever you're carrying right now, whatever silence or loss you've survived, it doesn't disqualify you from a better future. Sometimes, it prepares you for it. If this story resonated with you, if it made you reflect, pause, or feel understood, please like this video, share it with someone who might need it, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep telling stories that heal, not just entertain. Thank you for being here. This story is a fictional narrative created for storytelling and emotional reflection purposes only. All characters, events, companies, and situations depicted are entirely fictional and do not represent real people or real-life cases. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or deceased, or to real events is purely coincidental. The themes explored in this story, such as betrayal, loss, resilience, accountability, and healing, are intended to convey moral lessons and emotional insight, not to report factual incidents or make claims about real individuals or organizations. This content is designed for entertainment, inspiration, and thoughtful reflection, encouraging viewers to consider personal growth, emotional strength, and ethical responsibility. Viewer discretion is advised, and the story should not be interpreted as legal, medical, or financial advice. Our goal is to share meaningful narratives that resonate emotionally while remaining clearly within the realm of creative fiction.